Story 1. I met Keith Carradine at a gas station in Nashville in 2012. I walked by, stopped, turned and said, "Hey, you're in Dexter." He turned, smiled, walked back, and we talked for about 15 minutes in the parking lot. He was living in a camper and traveling across the country. It was New Year's Day, cold as hell, and he was wearing a Hawaiian shirt, khaki shorts, and flip-flops, happy as could be. Story 2. Gordon Ramsay was very nice. Hell's Kitchen made me think he would be like that in person. Story 3. I saw Mos Def walking down Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. I asked for a picture and he said yes. He was cool as hell. I also met Joe Biden at a hardware store. Story 4. I had many encounters while living in New York City and London, but this was my favorite. In July 2006, around 10 a.m., I was getting coffee at a Starbucks in the West Village. An extremely disheveled Alec Baldwin came in wearing a stained, matching gray sweatshirt and pants. He hobbled to the counter and growled, "Ice now." The barista handed him a cup of ice. He nodded in appreciation and hobbled back out onto 6th Avenue. I had the distinct impression this was a regular occurrence. Story 5. I met Robin Williams and Vincent Price when I was a front desk clerk at a Radisson hotel. They were both very nice and humble. Story 6. In my former job, I handled very important people at a very high-end luxury hotel. I have many great stories. One still haunts me and I feel bad about it. I was waiting for a very important guest to arrive because he was late. When he, his wife, and baby arrived around midnight, I welcomed them and took them up to their suite. The whole time he seemed off, at least that is what my naive 20-something self thought. He was slurring, walking slowly, and he seemed to throw jabs at my head as he walked behind me in the hallway from the elevator. I quickly left after showing them to their suite and went out to meet friends. I told them how disappointing this icon seemed because he appeared drunk. The next day, the announcement came that he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Muhammad Ali. Story 7. I have briefly met a few people through my work and can say that Pedro Pascal and Miley Cyrus are both friendly and generous tippers. Story 8. Tom Hardy was great with the fans who waited to meet him. He signed everything and took multiple photos. His bodyguard grew impatient but waited until Tom was finished. I got his real laugh. I know this because his publicist at the time asked what I had said, saying that was his actual laugh. I told him, "You were great in Bronson." Then I leaned in and quietly added, "Because sometimes I am a big old girl, you were fantastic in Wuthering Heights." Story 9. I met Liza Minnelli and the late, great Kevin Aucoin, her makeup artist. I was a little girl. They were both very friendly. I was smoking outside my building about 14 years ago when I saw a white Escalade. In the passenger seat, Nelly Furtado was on her phone. She was gorgeous. She looked at me. I looked at her, then I looked away. Story 10. I met disc jockey Qualls of Road Trip and the New Guy fame outside a bar in Chicago. He was super nice. He took my phone and snapped several selfies. My wife told him he had been her celebrity crush when she was younger. He laughed and told us he was gay. I looked that up on the way home, could not find anything, and figured he was joking. He came out publicly about 8 years later, so I felt like I had gotten the inside scoop from the man himself. Story 11. A few friends and I were walking to a record shop when, out of nowhere, we saw T.J. Miller on a scooter. He looked at us, yelled, "Yeah, I can't believe it either," and then zoomed up the block ahead of us. Story 12. My friend used to live across the street from David Bowie and Iman in south of Houston Street. I met them a couple of times on the street. He was cool and funny. She was impossibly attractive, almost unreal. Story 13. I was shopping at Dick's Sporting Goods in the mall for some football gear when a very large man walked up behind me, also browsing. I turned around and it was Terrell Owens, whom the Buffalo Bills had just signed. I do not think he was actually looking to buy anything. He was just walking around with his bodyguards. I did not say anything, but he struck up a conversation about my playing football and ended up buying me a lot of equipment. Super cool guy. I also saw Stevie Johnson at the same mall once, but I did not approach or talk to him because he was just trying to live his life, laughing out loud. Story 14. I met Macy Gray at Pride in Toronto. I asked for a photo because she was the first celebrity I had ever seen in person. She was extremely rude. Story 15. I met Randy Travis some years ago. He was the nicest guy, very kind and gracious. Story 16. I played blackjack with Bruce Willis in Atlantic City. It was a $25 table and he was betting $25 to $100 per hand, having a blast and getting very excited at winning $25. He would tip $25 after winning $100. Story 17. I bumped into Nigel Farage when I was 18. I was staying in a hotel where his party was holding a conference. He kept looking at my girlfriend's chest. Story 18. At the time, my girlfriend was catering a small private event in the Berkeley Hills, and John Ritter was there. While looking for dishes under a table with a floor-length tablecloth, she popped out with her face close to his crotch. It was funny, he was very nice. Story 19. I ran into Steve Martin in Chicago about 15 years ago. It was evening. He was exiting a building as I was entering, and we almost collided. He began to say, "Excuse me." And I, a flustered fan, said, "Oh my God, hi." He smiled, said hello, and went on his way. Story 20. I was a background actor in a mid-1980s movie called Mischief. I was only 11, but I noticed chaos on set. One person, likely an assistant director, would tell me to stand here and do that, and another would come along and tell me something different even though no shooting was happening. I wanted to be near the actors, so I posted myself next to the kissing booth scene with Jamie Gertz, Kelly Preston, Catherine Mary Stewart, and Doug McKean. I literally set myself right next to them. Eventually, an assistant director came by and asked what I was doing. I said that he had told me to stand there and walk off when the scene started, and I pointed to Mel Damsky, the director. There was a 5-second pause. I thought I was in trouble, but she just said okay and moved on. I ended up talking with the actors, and they put me on one of their director-style chairs and let me hang out between scenes for hours over 2 nights while other extras were sent to a common area. I kept quiet and polite, and they seemed to like having me there. Over those 2 days, they gave me autographs and took pictures with me. One autograph filled a whole page. It made me a celebrity at school, and I appeared in local newspapers for being in the movie. It took about a year to edit the film, and they premiered it in Ohio where it was filmed and set. My mother called a local radio station and got us tickets. During the premiere, with limousines and a red carpet, I approached Catherine, who I admired most, and asked for an autograph, assuming she would not remember me. She lit up and said, "I already gave you one, Chris." She had given the long autograph and remembered my name a year later, then gave me a big hug. It made my year. Story 21. 15 years ago, while walking to work in Toronto, Jude Law asked me for directions. I gave them to him and he thanked me. Story 22. President Obama was staying at the hotel where I worked. I was preparing the lobby at 5:30 in the morning, so no one else was around. Looking out the lobby windows at the street, I saw him jogging. He passed the window where I was standing, looked at me, and smiled and waved. For that one brief moment, the leader of the free world acknowledged me personally. Story 23. I was at a Delta Sky Club in Los Angeles. They had a room closed off. One of my children spotted Redfoo. I had to look up his name. He is from the band Laughing My Freaking Ass Off. I was using a urinal when he came in. While I was finishing, I told him my children liked his band. He said thanks. As I write this, I wonder why I thought it was okay to talk to someone at a urinal. We also saw Max from Catfish on one of the shuttles at Los Angeles International Airport. We did not say hi. Story 24. In 1997, I was fortunate to meet Her Late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II during a half-hour audience with 2 other people. Her Majesty was interested in and supportive of the charity I was involved with at the time. I remember being surprised at her height. The Queen was quite short. I also remember her smile, which was very engaging. Story 25. Yeah, I ran into one once. I tried to play it cool but ended up tripping over my words while they smiled politely. Totally unforgettable. Story 26. Yeah, I met Dr. Martin Luther King in 1962 in Memphis, Tennessee. I was walking down the street, minding my own business and feeling good. I turned a corner when a man walked up, struck me in the chest, and I fell to the ground. I looked up and it was Dr. Martin Luther King. I said, "Dr. King?" He said, "Oops, I thought you were somebody else." Story 27. A former girlfriend of mine grew up in Los Angeles during the 1980s. She had photos with several celebrities. The ones that stand out are David Bowie, who was walking along the street and was happy to pose for a photo, and Eddie Van Halen, whom she met at a party. She said he was quiet but a nice man. Story 28. After the gig, I went for a few beers with the Levelers, the guy from Chumbawamba, and a founder of British Sea Power. All in all, a really lovely bunch and a great night in the Lake District. Story 29. I met Selma Blair while she was shopping where I work, around 2010. She was very kind. She let me do impressions of Legally Blonde and A Dirty Shame. We laughed and she hugged me. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, no makeup, and looked gorgeous. I love her. Story 30. I met Al Roker in an elevator at Grand Central Terminal. He was a nice guy and very funny. Story 31. It was not an encounter per se, but I saw David Dimbleby in the Gare du Nord Eurostar terminal in Paris and David Mitchell at the Tesco on Poultry in central London. Story 32. I asked Cuba Gooding Jr. for help jump-starting my truck that had died. I could not place his face at first, and I was finishing picking up some event rentals I had dropped off for an unnamed celebrity event the night before. He connected the cables to the wrong part of my car. After my car remained connected to his and still would not start, despite his insisting it must be completely dead, he went inside to use the bathroom. I quickly removed the clamps from both cars and attached them where they were supposed to go, and my car started immediately. Poor mechanical knowledge, I suppose, or maybe an all-night bender had him messed up. Story 33. I bought a ticket to the United Kingdom premiere of Little Miss Sunshine at the Edinburgh Film Festival. That year, they were also honoring Sean Connery with a Lifetime Achievement Award. I was sitting pretty close to the exit because I needed to run to another screening right after. The film was introduced by the directors, and just as the lights dimmed, someone was ushered into the seat beside me. It was Sean Connery. I could not focus on the movie because I kept looking at him to see whether he was enjoying it. At one point he turned and looked at me, apparently aware I was staring. I do not know why, but I leaned toward him and whispered, "Do you want any of my pick and mix?" and pushed the bag of candy toward him. He smirked, shook his head, and turned back to the movie. I told the directors about this the following night at a mixer, and they admitted they had been standing by the exit watching him as well. Addendum. Sean Connery was an abusive person, but it was more the circumstance and situation than the specific figure that left me a little starstruck. Story 34. I was the staff orientation leader for Eliza Dushku's graduate school cohort. Nobody made a big deal of it. I was quietly thrilled but kept it professional and said nothing. She was incredibly thoughtful and kind, and I am sure she is doing good work now as a therapist. Story 35. I have done business with several people. They were always cool, a little bit guarded but very reasonable. Story 36. I complimented a woman with her head down on her gorgeous dress in the bathroom of the Beverly Hills Hilton. She lifted her head. It was Cameron Diaz, and she gave me the brightest smile and complimented my outfit. I was a chubby young teenager from the Midwest, and she was so kind. Later we were in the lobby when my dad approached Harrison Ford and Callista Flockhart to tell Harrison how much he and my brother loved Star Wars and admired him. Harrison stepped in front of Callista to protect her, promptly brushed off my dad, and hotel employees told my dad that we should not approach celebrities. Ever since then, I have been a huge fan of Harrison Ford, not just because my dad was rude and entirely in the wrong, but because Harrison protected his partner, held his boundaries, and refused to give in. Story 37. She is an actress on Federal Bureau of Investigation shows. We flirted by text and had sex twice. Now she is unhinged by text and is a stage 5 clinger. I am not joking. She sent me a voice recording of herself masturbating to orgasm. She is 45. I am 37. Story 38. I pretended not to know her and asked for a picture because the cosplay was cool. Story 39. In 2019, I saw Ezra Miller at a bodega in Lower Manhattan. He seemed calm, pleasant, and put together. In 2022, I stopped at the base of Mauna Kea to stretch my legs and saw a man with wild black hair, a purple blazer, and red boots doing an odd dance alone in the parking lot. My first thought was, how had a homeless person reached such a remote area? Looking closer, it was indeed Ezra Miller. It was just the two of us, so I smiled and tried to be friendly, saying I would not disturb whatever he was doing. He shot me a hateful look, then jumped into a large truck and raced up the mountain. By that time, he had reportedly been causing disturbances on the island of Hawaii for weeks. From the look he gave me, I understood why he had been arrested multiple times for assault and similar incidents. Story 40. I checked Toya Wilcox into the hotel where I was working. She was tiny and beautiful, and I immediately fell in love. Later, she called down for 2 bottles of beer. I delivered them. She opened the door, looked left and right in the corridor, and then invited me in. She said one of the beers was for me. I drank it and thanked her. I was not at my chatty best because I had just fallen in love. It was the best celebrity encounter I have ever had. Story 41. I once had a brief and eternally embarrassing encounter with Tony Blair, who was the British Prime Minister at the time. It was around 1998 or 1999, so I would have been 12 or 13 years old. I went to a high school near where his wife Sherry had studied. They were in town on a general tour. He came into our computer lab during an information technology class. He wandered around, chatting with some of the students. When he came to me, he asked what I was doing in information technology that day. My brain promptly shut down and I replied, information technology. He gave a polite smile, made a small polite sound, and moved on. I still think about it sometimes. He probably does too. Story 42. I was sitting in a jacuzzi at a posh fitness center in Notting Hill when John Cleese got in as well. I have met a few famous people, but he was the only one who left me starstruck because I grew up watching Monty Python and Fawlty Towers. I met Brian Eno at the same club. Story 43. I met Rob Lowe while he was filming Brothers and Sisters on location at the ice rink. I was a Zamboni driver. He had a scene where he was ice skating during a public skating session. The production team brought a brand new pair of hockey skates for him to use, and he wore those skates much of the day. Pretty quickly, his feet were getting really sore. I heard his assistant talking to our professional shop attendant about it. They were trying to find comfortable new skates, which do not really exist. I mentioned that Rob needed worn-in skates and said I had the same size skates with me at the rink. They were Bauer Vapors. He used my skates for the whole day. At the end, I asked his assistant if Rob would autograph the skates for me. He wrote my first name followed by thanks for the skates. Rob Lowe. On my recreational hockey team, a teammate would tell the other teams that I had skates autographed by Youngblood, and that no one could beat me, although we often got beat. Rob Lowe was very kind and so stunningly handsome that it was hard not to stare. About 20 years later, I still have the skates. Story 44. I saw Flying Lotus at a grocery store in Los Angeles yesterday. I told him how cool it was to meet him in person, but I did not want to be a douche and bother him or ask for a photo. He said, "Oh, like you were doing now?" I was taken aback. All I could say was, "Huh?" He kept cutting me off with "huh," and closed his hand in front of my face. I walked away and continued my shopping, and I heard him chuckle as I walked off. When I went to pay, I saw Flying Lotus trying to walk out the doors with about 15 Milky Ways in his hands without paying. The cashier was professional and said, "Sir, you need to pay for those first." At first he pretended to be tired and did not hear her, but he eventually turned back and brought them to the counter. When she took one of the bars and started scanning it multiple times, he stopped her and told her to scan them individually to prevent any electrical interference, then turned and winked at me. After she scanned each bar and put them in a bag and started to say the price, he interrupted her by yawning loudly. Story 45. I was walking through Greenwich Village with my wife and another couple about 20 years ago. We saw Hilary Swank walking her small dog, which was relieving itself in the middle of the street. We made eye contact and smiled in surprise, as if to say, "We know who you are." She returned our friendly smile, we waved, and went our separate ways. Lovely encounter. Story 46. I worked at a station that made commercials and local television shows. One was a craft show and the host had Barry Williams, also known as Greg Brady, as a guest star for the evening. I went to let him into the building when I saw him pull up, dressed in full 70s regalia. When I opened the door, I said, "Hello, do you have an appointment?" He did not laugh. I tried to break the tension by saying, "Of course I know who you are. Come on in." But I don't think he appreciated my little joke. Story 47. I saw Gwendolyn Christie, who plays Brienne in Game of Thrones and appears in Severance and Wednesday, at a hotel in Belfast in 2012. She was walking toward me in the lobby and I asked for a picture. She was very nice and politely declined, saying they were about to leave for filming. The night before, I walked past Michelle Fairley, who plays Catelyn Stark in Game of Thrones. Later that night, I stood next to Rose Leslie, who plays Ygritte, at a convenience store and did not realize it until I saw a bunch of the cast the next day. I had dinner with Bruce Campbell in 1997. He was very down-to-earth, like hanging out with any regular person. I hope he is still the same in person. Story 48. I have met quite a few over the years, mostly at Comic-Con. They are usually nice, though I suppose they would be, since people pay to meet them. I have also bumped into a few while shopping or in clubs, mostly football players. I have only ever met one who was a bit of an arsehole, which was a letdown because I had always been a fan. I think it was just that the store had run out of the book he was signing and had asked him to still let people take selfies with him. Story 49. The Queen Mother was a lovely lady but was ushered off to an engagement. Jerry Springer was utterly bewildered in that setting. His nose looked very odd. Leslie Nielsen was a genius, very funny. The fart toy gag was hysterical. The lead singer of Manic Street Preachers was a bit of a knob. Roxette. Both of them ended up dining with us. Charming enough. Jeremy Beadle was very kind. Penn and Teller. Penn is huge and Teller does speak. Levi Roots was a lovely man. James Martin was a nice guy who talked about cars. Colin Furze was a diamond. Hacksmith. I had no idea who he was, but my son was excited. Nick Zametti, wow, that is some energy. Helen Chamberlain was just making it in football and had been a sea lion handler. Highlight, Norman Wisdom, an incredible person. Jeremy Bowen. I fluffed my words with him. I regret that. Very gracious and kind. Max Clifford. At a noisy party in a restaurant, he came over and paid for all our meals and drinks as an apology. He was arrogant, but that seemed fair enough. Not bad for someone who was not in the entertainment business. Story 50. About 25 years ago, I met Erykah Badu at the desk of the hotel where I was staying in New Orleans. I was 15 or 16 and too nervous to say hi, so I told her someone would be right back to help her. Story 51. In 2025, Tyson Fury was right behind me in the queue for immigration. It was past 10 p.m. and the last flight from the United Kingdom had just landed in Tenerife. I was second to last and he was last in the queue. We did not speak. The woman ahead of me wanted a selfie, and he politely declined, saying it would attract attention, which I thought was a good call. Story 52. I stayed at a hotel in Washington, District of Columbia, tagging along with my dad, so I could visit the museums while he attended a conference. The hotel had a breakfast buffet in the lobby for conference attendees. There were a few people around, so I grabbed a plate filled with bacon strips and headed to the elevator. On the way, I almost bumped into someone. I looked up and saw Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank in person. He smiled at me in a smug way, as if amused that someone like me was at such a nice hotel taking bacon from the buffet. I also stayed in Van Nuys with a friend for a month and frequently went to Balboa Park to skate. Story 53. I met Andre Royo, the actor who played Bubbles on The Wire, at Los Angeles International Airport. I was very stoned, and we were getting situated after security. At first, I did not recognize him because he was dressed very nicely, but something in the back of my mind told me I knew him. We made eye contact, and my baked self said, "Are you Bubs?" He laughed and said yes. I thanked him for his great work and we went our separate ways. I was geeking out afterward because The Wire is the best show ever. Story 54. Dennis Rodman once bought me a pair of scissors and an iced tea at a Walgreens. Story 55. I met Graham Elliott at a nonprofit organization where I worked. We both posed as if playing air guitar for a picture. He was a cool person. Story 56. I met Gordon Ramsay in a hotel elevator in Hong Kong. I was starstruck, but he was very friendly. Story 57. This was around 1997 or 1998. I was staying at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City, and my dad and I were in the sauna with Martin Short. He was a lovely guy. Story 58. I was an extra in the Sabrina the Teenage Witch spin-off movie Sabrina Down Under while backpacking in Australia in 1999. Melissa Joan Hart was too good to speak to us. The Great Unwashed. Some of the cast of the Australian soap Neighbours were in it. Peter O'Brien and Scott Michelson were a good laugh and pinched my copy of For Him magazine. Story 59. I was a junior chef working the carvery for a hotel chain. Robbie Williams asked for a thick ham steak instead of slices. I obliged, and he tipped me a crisp 100 United States dollars, which was worth nearly twice as much in my currency. Story 60. I met Dan Aykroyd when he became lost on his way to a coronavirus disease 2019 vaccination and gave him directions by phone because he was driving in a new city. He was very pleasant. Story 61. I saw Samuel L. Jackson on Oxford Street one Sunday morning, but I decided not to bother him in case he gave me the Ezekiel treatment. Story 62. At the 2012 London Olympics, my school got us tickets to watch basketball. A French team walked past us outside, and Tony Parker stopped at the fence in front of me. As a teenager, I pleaded for a picture, but he kept talking to someone he recognized. He made no eye contact and showed no reaction. He acted as if I were not there. I didn't think he owed me anything, but it was still a bit annoying, especially since he was a player I really liked. Story 63. Mike Tyson on the street in New York City at the height of his boxing career. Funny, polite, and friendly. Story 64. I met Mr. Rogers at the Pittsburgh airport when I was 2 years old. It is one of my earliest memories. All I remember of the encounter is crawling through and around his legs and the seats at the gate. Story 65. I walked through the Atlanta airport with Gerard Way and his wife. I had been to his My Chemical Romance show at the Tabernacle the night before and was flying out with my parents on vacation that day. I was walking near him, smiled, and made the sign for an autograph. He waved me over and told me to walk with him. He asked what I thought about their opener, Thursday. We walked to the Sky Lounge, shook hands, and he signed an autograph for me. It was one of the most memorable moments of my life. He was unbelievably nice. He really made my year. Story 66. Living in New York City, I've seen a few celebrities. The coolest was riding the subway with Steve Buscemi when I was in high school. He was in Park Slope and he was talking to a friend about films. I was sitting down and he was standing at a pole directly in front of me. Last year, I made eye contact with Evan Peters in Brooklyn. He seemed normal but intimidating. I met Lady Gaga at Pride in 2017, if I recall. She was just walking by. I thought she was a beautiful woman and said hello, then realized it was Lady Gaga 3 seconds later. A crowd started forming, and it was kind of crazy. I crossed the street in opposite directions with Sky Ferreira once, around 2014. I was obsessed with her at the time, but I just looked at her as if to say, okay, cool, no big deal. She looked anxious. I hung out with Alia Shawkat at Elsewhere once after telling her she looked familiar. Story 67. I met Dee Wallace in the ladies' room at an unidentified flying object conference. I told her I liked her outfit before I saw her face. She was really pretty, nice, and funny. Story 68. I was in line for the ski lift at Sunshine Mountain in Banff in the 1990s with Richard Dean Anderson. The lift stopped for a few minutes and people started making jokes, asking MacGyver to fix it, which he did not find funny. Story 69. I met the 1996 Dream Team. I was wearing a Shaq jersey. I asked him for his autograph. He said, "I'll be right back, little man, and I'll sign it." I went to work out. He never signed it. Thanks, Shaq. Story 70. I shared a non-communal bathroom with Ashley Simpson at a club in West Hollywood. The venue was a shoe store during the day and a boutique nightclub in the evening. She cut in line when it was my turn. We urinated in front of each other and had a normal conversation. The next morning, I woke up in a gutter and went to work, where I was suspended for having makeup all over my face. Not because of Ashley Simpson. Story 71. I met Joe DiMaggio at the restaurant where I worked. He was a simple eater and asked for warm water. I remember that he was low-key and humble. Story 72. In 1988, I was with a group of friends at Delph's in North Hollywood. I sat next to Corey Haim, who was also with friends at the sushi bar. We said hello and then minded our own business. Story 73. Met David Usher twice because he lives, or at least has a flat near my workplace. We chatted a bit. I congratulated him on his career and asked what he is up to nowadays. He was very chill. I also walked past Eden Ivy because she lives in the same area. If you know, you know. I did not say anything. Story 74. I ran into Hugh Downs and his wife at Dunkin' Donuts in Scottsdale one morning. They often came for breakfast. They were two of the sweetest and most affable people I have ever met, more impressive than celebrities. Hugh, nearly 90 at the time, looked dapper enough to go on camera right then. Story 75. For a while, I worked in an airport lounge for first-class passengers. I had the chance to meet several celebrities: George Foreman, Dirk Benedict, Samantha Fox, and Barbara Eden. If I remember correctly, they were all very polite and friendly. Story 76. I was friends with a celebrity for over 2 decades. It was cool until they decided their politics mattered more than our friendship. I met Rosario Dawson, Michael Phelps, Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and Corey Feldman. Everyone was very cool except Corey, who was a jerk. Story 77. I posted an Ace Post alternate universe weeks ago. One day later, Corey replied to the post saying they finally had alternate universes themselves because of me. Story 78. I met a few Love Island contestants from the United Kingdom. Belle Hassan was extremely rude. Kem Sedane was very nice. Chloe Crowhurst was also lovely. Adam and Zara, when they were together, were very polite. Ollie Merce was rude. He kept me at my old workplace for an extra hour on Christmas Eve because he was not ready to leave yet. Story 79. Hank Haney stood behind me at the Masters watching Tiger tee off. I asked him if he wanted to get closer, saying, "You probably need to see this more than I do." He chuckled. I also gave Marco Bellinelli a fist bump at Neiman Marcus. I am 6 feet 3 inches tall, and he made me feel like a toddler. Nice guy. Story 80. I met a few, but the funniest one is this. I saw him, introduced myself, and ran away. He chased me into a restroom stall and we started dating. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.